Welcome to The Explainer. So, I have some absolutely fantastic news for you all. I've completely solved the housing affordability crisis. Yeah, it turns out the entire reason you can't afford a home, it has absolutely nothing to do with a massive multi-decade structural failure in the global economy. Nope. According to a very helpful millionaire quoted in the media a few years back, the real culprit is your brunch habits. Yep, if you just stop buying that delicious, overpriced mashed avocado on sourdough bread, you're magically going to have the hundreds of thousands of dollars you need for a down payment. Problem solved, right?
All right, let's drop the sarcasm. Today we're looking at generation rent, the myth versus the systemic reality.
So, let's kick things off with a number that perfectly sets the stage for this entire mess, 7.1 million. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the U.S. currently has a staggering deficit of 7.1 million affordable rental homes for low-income renters. To put that into perspective, for every 100 low-income households desperately looking for a place to live, there are literally only 35 affordable units available. This isn't just a tiny squeeze in a couple of trendy coastal neighborhoods. No, this is a massive structural supply failure hitting every single state in the country. There just aren't enough doors with keys to go around.
Now, let's look at the actual math, which completely destroys that whole just save more money argument. Over the last decade or so, we've seen an explosive 57% spike in home prices. 57%! Meanwhile, average household incomes? Well, they've basically just crawled forward. Incomes are practically stagnant, while housing costs have just rocketed straight to the moon. So listen, no amount of financial discipline, skipped lattes, or canceling your streaming subscriptions is going to bridge a gap that ridiculously wide. The average consumer's purchasing power in the housing market has just been entirely obliterated.
Okay, so why exactly did prices do this? Well, welcome to the wildly cheerful, totally dystopian world of rentier capitalism. Academics use this term to describe a massive structural transformation in how we actually treat housing. You see, it used to be viewed as a fundamental social necessity, right? A place to actually live and raise a family. But now, it has been fully financialized into a speculative, rent-extracting investment tool. It is basically treated exactly like a high-yield stock portfolio. Massive financial actors buy up properties not to live in them, but to extract your hard-earned wages in the form of ever-increasing rent. It's this vicious, self-reinforcing cycle that just drags down the entire economy, because if all your cash goes to your landlord, you aren't spending it anywhere else.
And hey, if you thought the invisible hand of the free market was setting your rent price, think again. Sometimes the algorithm did it. No, seriously. The U.S. Justice Department is actively investigating property management software platforms like RealPage. The allegation here is wild. Corporate landlords are allegedly feeding all their private data into a centralized software that tells them exactly how much to aggressively hike rents, and even advises them to keep some units completely empty just to artificially constrain supply and maximize their profits. So that massive rent hike you just got? Yeah, it might not just be a tight market. It could literally be algorithmic price fixing.
Because of all these structural forces, we are left with generation rent. But researchers point out this isn't just one big monolith of sad young people. There are actually 4 very distinct academic subcategories here, so, you can figure out exactly which specific flavor of financial despair you personally belong to. First up, the delayed buyer. That's the middle-class earner who might finally buy a home at 40 instead of 28. Then the tenant, someone who's likely going to rent forever but has a bit of stability. Third is the precariat. These folks are constantly living on the edge of eviction. And finally, the second-generation owner, aka the lucky few whose parents are rich enough to literally just hand them a bag of cash for a down payment.
Now, for the rest of us who don't have wealthy parents handing out free down payments, consumer behavior has had to adapt. And it's adapted in a rather nostalgic way. Welcome to the basement dweller economy. Sociologists are calling this the refamilialization of housing. Look, moving back into your childhood bedroom used to be stigmatized as this huge personal failure to launch, right? But today, it is a highly strategic, practically mandatory economic survival tactic. Young adults are being forced back into multi-generational living purely out of financial constraint, and this is completely changing the broader economy by delaying major life milestones, like getting married or having kids.
And this brings us to a really dark hidden cost of this whole crisis, the mental health toll. Because it turns out that forced co-residence, constant affordability stress, and the looming threat of your landlord hiking rent by 20%, yeah, that completely tanks your psychological well-being. Studies are showing a direct, severe link between housing cost burdens and worsening mental health. And we're not just talking about young adults feeling like they're falling behind. We're also talking about their totally exhausted parents who really thought they were finally going to get the empty house to themselves.
Oh, and we definitely cannot forget Generation Z, who are brilliantly getting a head start on this entire nightmare.
Data shows that young people today are entering the workforce already burdened by massive personal and auto loan debt incredibly early, often right after or even before they finish school. So before they even get the chance to casually browse Zillow, their debt-to-income ratio is completely fried. They're trapped in this cycle of high-interest consumer debt, effectively killing any chance of getting a mortgage before the race even starts.
So, let's just summarize this massive shift. In the old housing market, homes were actually affordable. Prices were tied to local wages, and high homeownership was a realistic goal for the working class. You know, the classic American dream. But the new reality? It's a highly financialized, algorithmically price-fixed, rentier-dominated dystopia where housing is treated strictly as an asset class for the wealthy to park their capital. The fundamental rules of the game have completely changed, and the players at the bottom have just been locked out.
Which brings us to our next section, fixing the American dream and what local governments can actually do about it.
Okay, I promise I am not going to leave you completely depressed here. There is actually some genuine optimism to be found, mainly because the solutions already exist. We don't need to invent some magical new technology to fix this. Local governments literally just need to get out of their own way and let people build houses. Right now, the biggest villain in local housing policy is single-unit zoning. In so many U.S. cities, massive chunks of land are legally restricted so you can only build one single detached house on a lot. It completely chokes the supply. The obvious solution here is upzoning. This means local governments rewrite the rules to allow slightly denser construction, like duplexes, townhomes, or small apartment buildings on those exact same lots. Combine that with mixed-use development, where you put apartments on top of a grocery store or a cafe, and boom, you're increasing supply, dropping costs, and making neighborhoods way more walkable all at once.
But of course, then you have the red tape. Getting permission to build housing right now is an endlessly complex, wildly expensive maze. A lot of towns use what's called discretionary approvals, which is really just a fancy bureaucratic way of saying developers have to sit through years of angry town hall meetings where wealthy neighborhoods try to block any new construction. The fix for this? Moving to by right approvals. This means if a developer's plan actually meets the existing zoning and building codes, they just get their permit. Period. No special permissions, no endless hearings, just getting shovels in the ground faster and cheaper.
And look, there's an entire toolbox of practical data-backed solutions beyond just zoning. We've got inclusionary zoning, which has been successful in places like New York, literally requiring developers to set aside a certain percentage of new units specifically as affordable housing, and to sweeten the deal, cities can offer developer density bonuses, basically letting developers build taller buildings if they include those affordable units. We can also lean into public-private partnerships, where the local government provides the land and private companies bring the construction expertise. Add in some strong tenant protections like just cause eviction laws, and you suddenly create a market that actually builds supply while still protecting renters from getting exploited.
Which brings us to the final, slightly provocative question of this explainer. With all of these massive structural forces at play, will you ever own a home? Or is it time to just start investing in some really nice rugs for your landlord's basement? Look, this housing crisis isn't a natural disaster, it is a policy choice. It's driven by financialization, algorithmic pricing, and completely restrictive local zoning. But as we've just seen, the tools to fix it are sitting right in front of us. So the next time someone tells you to just stop buying avocado toast, well, you are now fully armed with the systemic facts to explain exactly why they are mathematically wrong. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.